This interview is a part of the Oklahoma Historical Society's Oral History Program, Living Legends Collection. This interview was originally conducted on March the 5th, 1965. The interview is conducted by Mr. Frank Doyle. The interviewee is Mr. L.C. Mersfelder. That's Mersfelder. This interview is being re-recorded on April the 5th, 1985, for inclusion in the permanent collections of the Oral History Program by Judith Michener.
Mr. Mersfelder, the Living Legend Library, as perhaps you do know, at Oklahoma Christian College, if Dr. Barrett has had an opportunity to talk to you. The purpose is to have on hand at the college not only the history of some of the people around Oklahoma City. As a matter of fact, most of the people who lived here and contributed to the city in their own way, but also to have it in their own voice, which would be unique in that it will be about the only one in the country, at least at this particular time. So I think first of all we ought to find out as to when you came to Oklahoma City and from where.
I was transferred to
Go ahead.
Oklahoma City from New Mexico. I was state manager for Kansas City Life in that state for a number of years, and I was transferred here to Oklahoma City on the first day of September 1924.
How long were you in New Mexico?
Well, I had been there in the education work and in the insurance work together for about 15, 20 years.
Were you born there?
No, I was born in Texas.
Born in Texas.
Mm-hmm. Southeast Texas, and I attended school at the college at Denton, Texas, and then moved out to the Western Plains and had a little experience out there as a cowboy.
Oh, you did?
On the largest ranch in the United States, the XIT. XIT, many times larger than King's Ranch. Of course, it's been cut up now into smaller ranches. But I have pictures up there on the wall of when I played cowboy there in 1903 and 4. And I had a lot of experience on the Western Plains there on that ranch as a cowboy.
I should imagine you did.
And then I spent a number of years in the educational work there. I was city superintendent, county superintendent, and state director of industrial work. I taught mathematics in the Normal University at Las Vegas, where I was also graduated, And I served in the Senate there 6 years. And that was quite an interesting time because in those days the majority of the people there were Spanish speaking. And in the legislature you had to have interpreters for everything. And the law required you to, before you could introduce a bill or discuss it, you had to have it printed in English and Spanish. And then when they discussed it on the floor of the House and Senate, you had to have an interpreter. Mm-hmm. And it was quite an interesting occasion, interesting experience.
I imagine that was. Could get awfully confusing for some people too, couldn't it?
As I was told, and then as educational director, I had to travel all over the state, and I introduced the teaching in the public schools a system of agriculture and manual training in the domestic arts. I had to get that instituted in the different schools of the state. And one experience I had was quite interesting. When I was out on a trip over the state with the state superintendent of schools,
All right, go ahead.
Alvin N. White, and by the way, he has a sister here, Miss White, who's worked with the department out here a number of years. Anyway, we were on this tour and we got to Silver City and spent the night, and then we read about the raid of Villa on Columbus, Pancho Villa.
Pancho Villa?
And that was right on our tour, so the next morning we drove right on over to Columbus, and the buildings there were still, some of them smoking, and there were dead Mexicans all over the prairie, and they were still hauling them in from out on the prairie. But Villa got away,
Yes.
and this government spent many thousands of dollars trying to catch him, but they never did get him. But that was quite an experience to go in there and see that town that was still burning that he set on fire.
I should imagine, yes.
And it's quite a history. They had quite a little article about that in the Oklahoman here about a month or two ago.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, I gave up the work there. I was transferred from there over to Oklahoma. And I served here as general agent for 38 years.
You came here to Oklahoma when now?
Oklahoma City in September 1, 1924, which was 41 years ago now.
Right.
But I served as general agent here over some pretty rugged times.
I'll bet. Where was
Drought and panics and epidemics and wars and everything else.
Well, that meant you had to set up the whole agency then, didn't you?
Yes, started right from scratch. I never
Yeah.
knew a person in this city or state, and I worked pretty hard. But when I resigned as manager 3 years ago, I had over 35,000 active customers, good citizens in this state, and over $100 million of good standard business, not group, but personal life insurance and endowments and annuities. And I was quite proud of that record.
I should imagine.
And I'm called now the associate state manager, but Mr. David Bridges, my son-in-law, is the manager and general agent. And as I told you before, I operate the game and fish department.
I know that we're sitting in the game and fish department of the of the agency.
I look after that department, the others do the work. But for years, the people here in the office have begged me to let them do my work so I could go off and catch fish and bring them back and give them a fish dinner. And for 25 years, without a miss, I went to the Rocky Mountains in New Mexico and my brother's ranch and brought back a big buck deer. 25 years without a miss. And we always had a big annual celebration they called the Deer Dinner. And they still have the annual celebration and still have a dinner, and they call it a deer dinner, but they don't have any deer. But that has been quite a tradition with the agency here in the state.
You opened the agency then for the Kansas City Life.
Right.
And had to actually start everything, hire the people and train them,
I'd
send them
hire
around
the
the city?
people and train them, work myself, work with them. I did personal selling, and training, and so on through the years. A lot of experience and a lot of work.
Where was the first office, do you remember?
How's that?
Where was the first office?
My first office was in the old Farmers National Bank building, which is down at the end of where there's a bend in Robbins.
Oh, yeah.
Just on, what do they call that street now?
Sheridan?
Sheridan now. And then the city now, I had my office upstairs there in that bank for some time, and then I moved from there to the Braniff building. And I was up on the top floor of the Braniff building for a number of years, and then when they built First National Bank building, I moved in there. I was well acquainted with Ed Smith, the builder, and he let me move in the evening before the rest of the crowd moved in the next day. So I was the first one to move in that building.
First tenant, huh?
An office there on the same floor for 22 years. And then we put up our building up here.
Uh-huh.
And we've been here in this building ever since.
Well, this is a nice new modern facility.
We did occupy the west side of this up until a few months ago when we took over this larger side. We have about double the space that we did have. Have plenty of parking space and all. Makes it pretty nice for our workers, salesmen, office girls, and for customers.
Uh-huh. How many agents do you have now?
In the state, I would say about 75. Now the state's pretty well covered, all parts of the
I'll
state.
bet you do. Well, you were not only busy in the insurance business, but I know very well that you spent a great deal of time, and it's public knowledge, in your civic activities, Mr. Marsfelder.
Yes, I'm a great believer in civic activities because I think that those are the things that help to build our city. Chamber of Commerce, the YMCA, and the church work. And I've maintained my membership regularly for 41 years now with the Chamber of Commerce and the YMCA and the church, and of course the General Agents and Managers Club and the Underwriters Association. I've kept active with them all the time, and I feel that perhaps a lot of people don't appreciate as much as they should the great work of this Chamber of Commerce, formerly under Overholser, and then Stanley Draper. And I think that fellow's done a marvelous job for this city, marvelous job. And they have helped to unify the work of the civic clubs. I happen to be president of the Kiwanis Club here, Downtown Club, in 1932.
What club was that?
The Downtown Kiwanis.
Oh, Kiwanis.
Uh-huh. And previous to that time, I helped organize the first junior police in America. That is, the Kiwanis Club did, and I was a part of it. And for 2 years, I served as chief for the junior police. I think I'm the only person to ever serve 2 years. That's when we got getting it organized, and it took a lot of time because it has spread all over the United States.
It surely has.
And a year or two after that, I was up in Canada, Banff, Canada, and I talked to the Kiwanis Club there, and they took up most of my time asking about how we organized and started the junior police here in Oklahoma City. And so that work has spread. But going back to the civic work, I happen to have the honor of having been president of the big downtown club here and chief junior police, and served as a lieutenant governor of this district, and have a perfect attendance pin, which the club presented me with, a diamond-studded pin, showing a perfect attendance for 41 years.
Oh, boy.
And it'll be 42 years in June. And I have taken a lot of interest in all of the civic club because I know what they do with child welfare, with crippled children, with boys and girls, with scout work, and all of that kind of work. And I talk to many of these clubs from time to time, and especially the last few years I've talked to most of the civic clubs in this city, and I know what they are doing.
They all do have wonderful projects, don't they?
Yes, all
they
of them.
accomplish their aims.
Every one of them. They have their goals and their activities, and some will have one activity and some another. One club has an activity of buying shoes for children who otherwise would go to school with practically no shoes on. And some of them give parties for the crippled children. and some of them for the orphans. And all of those activities have meant a lot to Oklahoma City.
You know, the old saying that, which is so true, you give a busy man a job to do and he'll get it done. You didn't have too much spare time because I know you devoted a great deal of time to your work. It's rather obvious that how you built the agency. But also to your church work, as well as your being an avid sportsman.
Well, I didn't mention that I was elected as life elder in the First Christian Church, which is their highest honor of members, life elder.
I know that there is a very good friend of yours over the years, has been Mr. L.A. Mecklenburg, Lou Mecklenburg.
Yes.
And I know that there's a connection between the two of you and Dr. Benson, who is Chancellor of Oklahoma Christian College. Didn't you two gentlemen get Dr. Benson here to Oklahoma City that really got him thinking about moving to college?
Well, I don't remember the details so much about a luncheon that we gave for him at the Oklahoma Club when he first came here. Lou Mecklenburg and I planned the party. Lou says I planned it and worked up the names and did the work, and he provided the dinner. And he'll remember more of the details about that meeting than I do. But I think perhaps that was the first dinner that Dr. Benson attended when he came to Oklahoma City, and I think he was impressed by the interest of the businessmen in him and his work. But I recall very distinctly that at a later date, when I was serving as chairman of a joint committee of the civic clubs in connection with the Chamber of Commerce, and jointly we planned a big program at the auditorium, the Oklahoma City Auditorium, for Dr. Benson to speak. And we had a huge crowd fill the auditorium, and I think that meant a great deal to Dr. Benson. It did to us, because he was a good speaker and he knew whereof he spoke. And I remember that I asked our former pastor here, who is the late Bill Alexander, to introduce for Dr. Benson at that meeting. He gave a wonderful talk, and I'm sure that had a great deal of influence on his thinking to work to establish a school here, because he appreciated the interest of the business people of this city. I'm sure of that.
Well, obviously it started the ball rolling, because the college is here and it's doing magnificently. A fine school, great philosophy of teaching, and so forth. During the course of your business activity and your civic and church duties, which probably you couldn't call them duties, you enjoyed doing them, you also had a philosophy of life too that's run the strain has carried itself right on through your existence here in Oklahoma.
Well, yes, I have a very definite philosophy of life that I've worked up myself, and a lot of it I gained through personal association with old Judge Vaught, Judge Edgar S. Vaught, with whom I've worked for 10 years in the Department of Justice. I served as federal jury commissioner in this Western District, for a period of 10 years, and selected for the jury wheel some 10,000 names of some 10,000 citizens who served on the federal juries, petit jury and grand jury, and I served as foreman of the federal grand jury for 1 year, and I've served in the courts here as a juror in the district courts and the federal courts many, many times, and I'm well acquainted with the legal procedure in this city. I was going to tell you about the judge's philosophy. You want me to
Surely.
tell you a story about him and his philosophy. The judge loved to go with me over to my cabin on the Illinois River at Sequoia Club, which is near Delacroix. And he loved to fish, and he loved to play cards. And we would get up early. We would go way up the river and get in the boats, the canoes, and have Indian guides. And we'd fish all day, and then we'd come back late and have dinner. And then the old judge loved to play cards, play pitch. And every night, right after dinner, we'd play pitch. And realizing that we had to get up early, I would always insist on going to bed by 10 o'clock. And about 10 o'clock each night, I'd begin talking about stopping the game, and the old judge every night would say, well, can't we have just one more game? And so after about the third night on this particular trip, the old judge did the same thing, and I said, well, Judge, I want to ask you a question. I said, now here we've been going day and night for 3 days, up early, work late, playing cards till late. And every night when I say, let's go to bed, you say, can't we play one more game? And we always do. And he loved to play, but he'd never bet a dime on a game, no money, just reputation, but he loved to win. So I said, well, and the papers had recently stated that Judge was past 84, and he was proud of it. I said, now, according to the papers, you are past 84. Here you've been getting up early and working hard all day and sitting up late at night, and this is the third night, now you want to keep playing. Can you tell me what your philosophy of living is that you can keep up this kind of pace with the younger fellows? And the old judge says, well, he smiled and grinned a little, and he said, well, I'll tell you, he said, when I was a young man back in Virginia, I didn't gamble, and I didn't drink, and I didn't run around with wild women or any other wild people. But he said, I can best illustrate my philosophy of living by telling you this story. And so he told the story. He said, back there in Virginia when I was a boy, there was an elderly Negro woman that everybody loved and admired and respected. And when it was noised about that she had reached 100 years of age, everybody was interested, and the newspaper people wanted to talk with her and find out what her philosophy of living was. So they went out to her home out in the country, and after spending an hour or two, she discovered what they really wanted to know. So then she said, gentlemen, there's just 3 things. She said, when I works, I work. And when I sits down, I spreads out. And when I worries, I goes to sleep. And he said, now, gentlemen, that was her philosophy of living. And frankly, that has been pretty much my philosophy of living. He said, when I work hard. And when I play hard, as you fellows can see. And she said when she sits down, she spreads out. She means that she relaxes. And he says, that's what I do. When I sit down, I relax. She said, when I worries, I goes to sleep. The judge says, gentlemen, she said, when when I work hard. When I play hard. And if there's a job to be done, he says, I will go do it. But if I can't do it, I don't sit around and worry myself sick about it. And when I sit down, I relax, and when I go to bed, I go to sleep. And he said, that's a very simple philosophy, but that's been my philosophy of living. And I've thought about that a lot. I've told that story many times to civic clubs and others. And I think it's a good philosophy for anybody to have. In that meeting with us on that trip was Dale Bryce and the U.S. District Attorney. Can't call his name right now. He's still here in the city. But anyway, that was an experience that meant a great deal to me.
Well, you've always regulated your life fairly rather nicely in that you insisted that you relax and take some time off.
Have my fun and play and relax as well as work.
You've done quite a bit of fishing and hunting around, haven't you?
Yes, I've kept that up for years and years. I go regularly over to that cabin ever so often through the spring and summer and fall. And last summer, I took my wife and another couple, Mr. Jack Berry and his wife, and we got in my car and drove 1,000 miles due north from here into Winnipeg, Canada, and then 200 miles east to Vermilion Bay, where there's a number of Oklahoma City people spend the summer, a part of the summer. Duff Weber has a home there. And the Lyle Barnharts and the Dr. McDonalds and George Pulley and others from here go there and camp. And or rather stay at these cabins. And we spent 3 weeks there fishing and back, 2,800-mile trip. Mrs. Barry and I did the most of the driving in the car, and we never had 5-minute delay or any car trouble in any way, and had a wonderful time. And I felt quite proud of being able to make that trip my age.
When is your birthday?
What?
When is your birthday, the next one coming up?
Well, I'll be 81 next month.
Next month?
Next month, April 11th.
April the 11th.
April the 11th.
You
And I spend a lot of time, of course, on my books.
Yes.
That's been another one of my hobbies, writing, and as well as fishing and hunting. And did I tell you about making the trip to New Mexico on the deer hunts? I think I told you that, didn't I?
Who was with you on those trips?
Well, Mr. Hogan went quite a while, and then Mr. Tap Holcomb,
Yes.
and Bert Jennings, and those were the main ones that went out with me. But I went 25 years without a miss.
Well, Mr. Hogan was quite a hunter, wasn't he? Or is
Well,
quite
yeah,
a hunter.
he was a bird hunter and a deer hunter. And he would walk all the time. He would never ride. I'd ride horseback a lot of times. But Mr. Hogan would never ride. He would
Keep walking.
he would walk. And he's a wonderful guy. And he
Saw him
kept it up
yesterday, and
through
he's
the
just
years.
walking the same practically as he did
When
years
I
ago.
think of him and Mr. E.K. Gaylord, the two fellows for age, have really kept their age and kept going. Year after year.
Well, you've been on the go a lot, and at the same time, you find time to write.
Yes, I've had, that's been one of my hobbies. I completed my 8th book this year. Booklets and books. I have written 3 booklets, and then books. I have one booklet that I wrote on business. It is called Backlogs of Human Destinies. That was pertaining to our agency, wherein I give the pictures of the homes and pictures of the salesmen and their families and our office people, and that proved to be a very, very popular book with our organization. And then I wrote a book on business called A Life Career that was published by my company and used throughout the United States. And it gives the outlines of the requirements, I think, for anyone to make a success in business. And then I wrote another booklet about civic work called Privileges and Responsibilities. And still another booklet on a philosophy of living. And that includes some of the things that I've discussed about Judge Volt and some of the others. And that philosophy of living was rewritten or included in a book of mine called, an outdoor life book called Cowboy, Fisherman, Hunter, which is a 300-page book and has been one of my most popular books. It covers all phases of outdoor life and philosophy of living. And it was adopted and it was written 25 years ago. It was adopted and readopted by the New Mexico Board of Education as a supplemental reader in the public schools of that state for 19 years, repeated every year for 19 years. And it was also used as a supplemental reader in most of the schools in Oklahoma City, and highly endorsed by our superintendent of schools at that time, Dr. Swanson.
Yes.
And that book 2 years ago was repeated every year for 19 years. And it was also used as a supplemental reader in most of the schools in Oklahoma City, and highly endorsed by our superintendent of schools at that time, Dr. Swanson.
Yes.
And that book 2 years ago was taken by a publishing company, the Charles A. Clark Company of Glendale, California.
Yes.
And they got hold of a copy of it in buying up a private library. That was the Arthur H. Clark Company of Glendale, California, in their 60th anniversary. And they liked the book so well, they bought up all the original copies they could get.
The first edition.
The first edition, yes. Mm-hmm. And then they advertised it in their catalog of rare and choice books, and made the quote that it had many illustrations. It told about cattle thievery on the XIT ranch and the herding on the Texas plains. And they said it was a scarce book, and they sold them out, all they could get, for $15 a copy, a $3 book. Mm-hmm. And it has been sold individual copies. I know of one copy where a person was offered $25 for one copy, and they refused to sell it. They do once in a while sell them downhill on 2nd Street in the second-hand bookstore. I mean on Robbins, about 2nd Street in Robbins, and they sell them there for $10 or $12 a copy for an old used copy of the book. So it has been a very prominent book, and I plan, when I get a little more time, to have it republished.
Are you going to update it or what?
That
Are you going to re-edit?
Well, I may and I may not. I haven't worked that out yet. And few years ago, I made a trip to Europe, and when I came back, I wrote a book under the title, We Were the Foreigners. And I'll tell you how I got that title. We had 30 people in our party, and they were all the way people living all over the United States, from Florida to New York, California, Oklahoma. And I noticed every day some of them would make a comment about the foreigners, these foreigners. So finally one day when we were having a meeting, I said, just who are the foreigners here anyway? So one of our group answered the question, we are the foreigners. And I said, that's right. So that's how I got the title of that book. And it has been a rather popular book with some people, not too widely read. But it was published first as a booklet form in Oklahoma City, and then republished a year later by New York publishers in a much more attractive form, and has been rather widely read. And to give you an illustration of the book and its meaning, I sent a copy of it to the booklet to a friend of mine, Judge Howard C. Bratton, who is United States District Court federal judge for New Mexico, but who also comes here to help conduct federal courts. And in his comment, I think it is rather significant. He said, I thank you for your kindness in sending me an autographed copy of your booklet, We Were the Foreigners. I enjoyed all of the observations throughout, particularly the statements and conclusions at the end, where you talk about our relations with other nations and people. And he says it is interesting to note that while those statements and conclusions were reached some 10 years ago, they are equally and possibly more applicable today.
Right.
And so I thought that was a pretty significant letter.
Most certainly is.
During the past year or two, I served as editor with a staff to write the 75-year history of the First Christian Church of Oklahoma City. And in that book we have some 150 pictures, and we have all of the history of the beginning of the church here, starting in April '89 and coming up to the present time. And that was really quite an undertaking, but I had a very able staff to work with me, and we are indeed proud of the book.
It's a very fine-looking publication.
It makes a very nice appearance and is a book of real, true history. My latest book, I might say my 8th book, is written under the title, My Scrapbook of Wit and Wisdom, which is published by Vantage Press, New York. And in that book I have a collection of quotes of wit and wisdom, spiritual matters, and historical events that I've assembled over a period of some 60 or more years. And it's divided up into section in this manner. One section of comics, which a lot of people like, and I think our lives should include comedy and wit and witticism along with wisdom and spiritual, and that's what I have in this book. And the last chapter is a chapter about human interest stories, and I find that very inspiring and interesting. And I think most of the ministers of this city now have a copy of this book, and I've discussed the outline of this book before a large number of our civic clubs, and they all seem to enjoy it. And that's a part of my philosophy of life, because I think if a man takes himself too seriously and never enjoys a little humor along with it, that he soon becomes stale and a bore to himself and other people too.
Very true.
So that pretty well tells the story.
I noticed that Judge Murrah enjoyed the book.
Yes, I have here a copy of a letter that I received from Judge Murrah, and he says, and I appreciate the fact that he has taken so much interest in my books over the years, not only this book, but my outdoor life book. And he says, "Dear Mr. Mersfelder, I have just now had time to acknowledge receipt of your Scrapbook of Wit and Wisdom, and I wanted very much to read it before writing you about it. Of course, it reflects a life of usefulness flavored with a great sense of humor. It is a portrait of one we all love and admire, even as he loves life and nature. Your reference to Judge Vault is particularly gratifying, for as you know, he also loved life most when it was close to nature. I shall always cherish the book because of both of you. Sincerely, Alfred P. Murrah." I treasure that letter very highly. And of course I have hundreds of letters that I have received about these various books, and particularly this last book I have copies of letters, letters from people from all over the United States. And all of them I cherish very highly.
You were very observant during your entry into Oklahoma City and then your life here. I don't think you missed too much. A man of your ability and astuteness, you couldn't miss too much.
Well, I kept my eyes open, my ears.
Imagine there were some rather interesting incidents that perhaps you may be able to recall.
Well,
any that have stuck with you that may have affected you in any way, or at least affected your...
well, along what line now, and what way you...
most any line.
Huh?
Most any line. Your activities have been so varied that probably a lot of humorous incidents, too.
Well, I'll tell you, I'd like to tell you one story about Lou Mecklenburg.
Oh, that'd be good.
For 20 years or 30, Mr. and Mrs. Mecklenburg, and a lot of us, the McBrides and the New Biz, and a whole bunch of us have had seats together down at the OU football game.
Yeah.
And it happens that Lou and I sit next to each other. And we nearly always bet $1 on the game, just for amusement. And I get a lot of kick out of collecting off of Lou, but he gets twice as much out of collecting off of me. And one time, I was out in California when the game was over, and it happened that Lou won that game, so he spent about $2 or $3 on a telegram, long telegram, wiring me that he won the game and he needed the money and he'd like for me to send it to him. So I kept that telegram a long time. I guess I still kept it. But he had a great sense of humor and was a great inspiration to anyone, and I think he has done a great deal in helping to build this city. He built a plant from the ground up, and they manufacture material that's shipped all over the world. Well, I have to tell you one more story about Lou. He liked to go over to my cabin and fish. One time we were over there, one of our first trips, and we went down to 10 Kilo, and we had to drive over some very rough road, and we got down there about 10 or 15 miles from our cabin, and Lou discovered that he didn't have his license to fish. And I said, well, Lou, I'm not going to drive back to town, Tahlequah, to get you a license over that rough road. You'll just have to not fish or take chances on being picked up with a game warden. So we stopped in a little store to see if we couldn't get a license for Lou, a trading store and fish supply department there on the edge of the lake, near the lake. And they didn't have any license, and Lou was pretty downhearted and looked around, and there's some old fellow sitting there whittling and talking about fishing, and he spoke up and he said, well, it's too bad you're not 65 years of age. You wouldn't have to buy a license to fish. And old Lou pounded down on the table with his fist, and he said, by golly, that's the first time in my life it ever paid me to be old. And he said, I had a birthday last week and I was 65. So we went on then, Lou, and everybody was happy and fished. And we had a good time fishing. Well, I forgot to tell you one thing before we left that morning. Lou said, I'll bet $1 against the crowd that I bring in the largest fish. And we took him up on the bet, and that day at noontime, he came around. I noticed he looked in my fish box, see what fish I had, and I had one fairly good bass, not a big one, but pretty good one. And so he didn't say anything, but that night as we came in, he looked at my fish and he said, oh, I got that beat, and he pulled out a gar, a little gar, and but it was a few inches longer than my bass. I said, well, Lou, that's a gar, that's not a fish. We think about fish. He said, well, look up your definition for fish. It said it's got scales and it's in the water. All, and so I said, well, that's a funny fish. But we discussed it and argued about it on the way home in the car. We got back to the cabin a little about dark, and so the other fellows went on in the house, and Lou walked around the car by the side of me and jammed a $1 bill down my pocket, and he says, there's your damned old dollar, but says, we're going to have a hell of an argument about that fish, who won the bet, when we got over to the dining room. So we got over there, and we had our group, men and women, and we discussed it, and Lou made quite a speech, and all the women and most of the men voted for Lou. So he won the argument, but I still had the dollar. But I'll tell you now how he got that gar. The guide, who was a good friend of mine, and my guide that was guiding his boat that day, told me this story later. He said Mr. Mecklenburg saw he wasn't going to catch a good fish that day, so he had me take him around by the bank where all the bank fishermen were, and he'd call out and ask them what luck they had. And so finally we got to one old fellow, and he said, well, not much luck. Said, my wife caught a nice gar, but of course she threw it away. And he said, well, that's all right, how long was it? And the fellow showed him with his hand. He said, well, that's good. But he says, this fellow says, I pitched it over there in the ditch and the fly's been on it. He said, that doesn't make any difference, let me have it now. And he paid him for it, and the guide said, and brought it on in, and that's the way he got it. But he got a bigger kick out of winning the bet. He'd spend $10 to win a $1 bet. That was Lou Mack. But he's a great guy and has been one of the real builders of this city. and I'd take my hat off to him any time.
You must have met a lot of people like that, didn't you?
I've had a lot of fun. And I don't think there's a fellow in Oklahoma City that has worked harder and played more and had more fun than I have. And I've kept busy.
Oh, you've been busy. There's no question about it.
Yeah, I think I've got enough evidence to show I've kept busy.
Yes, and particularly the refreshing diversion. You like the outdoors.
I love the outdoors. I give talks. I teach a Bible school class of young unmarried people. And one of my discussions has been here lately on the beauties of nature. That is covered in several of my books on the beauties of outdoor life. And that is one of the things I've been teaching them, that the more you know about outdoor life, the more you'd appreciate your religion. And the more you study religion, the more you'll appreciate outdoor life. And I tell them that young people, one of the first things for them to learn, the important thing, is to learn about the laws of nature and of God and to obey those laws. Now, it's well to obey man-made laws, and we should do it, but sometimes they're just and sometimes they're unjust. And sometimes if we violate them, we may be punished and we may not be. But if we violate the laws of nature and the universe, the laws of the creator of the universe, we're going to suffer. Because they're universal. And those are some of the principles in which I take a great deal of interest, the laws of the universe, because I give that in all of my books, my booklet on the philosophy of life, my booklet on outdoor life, and my Scrapbook of Wit and Wisdom.
What are you working on now?
Well, I'm just saving up things. I may publish the second edition of my scrapbook.
Oh, really?
Anyway, I'm saving up things, and some people give me material, and they just say I have to use it sometime, so I'll keep collecting it, and if I get enough and Spirit moves me, why, I'll put out another edition of that book. I like to keep busy. I think if you keep busy, you keep out of trouble.
Yes, I would say so. Well, you're down here every day, aren't you?
I come down every day I'm in town. I come down here and spend the day. I even come down on Saturdays and get caught up on my work and outlining my talks for civic clubs and my Bible class and things like that. But I like to keep busy, and I think if you keep your mind active, it stays on and on.
Right.
And I try to make myself, one of my rules is to make myself commit things to memory, things that are important, and quotations from the Bible. I could give quotations from the Bible for an hour or so, but one right after another, and quotes on wisdom and spiritual things. And then I have a lot of things printed, and I'm going to give that to you on what I believe,
sure.
Spiritual matter. I think that covers pretty well everything I know. Everything I know is written in that book right there.
You've seen some interesting things happening around this city, even from 1924 on, haven't you?
Yes, for the last 40 years, 41, I've observed a lot of things around this city, and I marvel at the growth of it. I can hardly believe it. I get up and go around over on the outskirts of the town. I can get lost anywhere over the outskirts of town.
Anymore.
And I've been living here in active 40 years. But this town is building. It's amazing. It's terrific. And I think it's going to be one of the outstanding cities in the United States because of we're centrally located, east and west. We've got good highways. We've got good air connections. And we've got this Tinkerfield.
Oh, boy.
We've got this World Airport out here. And I like to travel. I travel quite a bit by plane and otherwise. I'm taking a trip to Honolulu next month.
Oh, you are?
Yeah, my wife and I and Miss Barry are going to fly to Los Angeles, get on a plane, the ship, Lurleen, and stay on the ship and keep our luggage there, but go and take tours all over the Hawaiian Islands. But we've come back every night. We'll sleep on the boat, and we'll come back to on the plane to. On the ship to Los Angeles, and then my company is having a big convention in Phoenix right following that time, so they've invited me and my wife to be their guests, and we've come by there and then fly back home. So I like to fly, and I like to ride a train, and like to ride in an automobile.
You like life, don't
But
you?
I want to tell you, we were talking about the laws of nature.
Yes, sir.
Here's a story that I've told many young people in older groups. And told me first by Dr. O'Hearn, who used to teach a Bible class here. He was a geologist and a university teacher down at OU. But he told this story that impressed me a great deal, and I put it in my books. And I tell this to young people, the laws of nature. He told this story. He said one time there was a report one morning. The reports came out that the steamship was 2 hours late due to a storm at sea. The airplane was due 4 hours late due to an electric storm. The railway train was 3 hours and 50 minutes late due to a wreck on the line. But the sun rose exactly 6:23 as per schedule. I thought that was a very, very impressive thing, that the laws of the universe are true. They hold true on and on. The operation of the moon and the stars and the sun and all of the planets. But man-made laws may change. And I have a theory of this thought, that when these laws are made here, the laws of the universe on the sun and the moon and the stars and all, they're universal and they stay put, and they can't be changed by man. If they could, we'd be in an awful mess pretty quick. But if people will learn to abide by them, they'll profit by it. But if they don't, they're going to suffer. And I don't like to hear people say if somebody violates one of these laws, like the law of gravity, if they get up on top of a building and tumble off with their carelessness, I don't like them to say they were taken. They took themselves. They are somebody else, the carelessness of man, but it wasn't God's fault. They disobeyed the laws that are put here for our benefit. And I think too many times we lay the blame on God for taking people when it's our own fault. And those are some of the fundamental principles that I think if people learn to abide by them, they'll be a lot better off. I have a lot of satisfaction. I was talking to groups where they're interested in things like that, and most groups are.
Surely.
I talked to the downtown, the South Side Rotary Club last week, and I never had a more responsive group in my life. They have a group of younger fellows, active. And next week, Tuesday night, I'll go out and talk to the Kiwanis Club at War Acres. And I talk to various groups all over the city from time to time and enjoy it a lot. That's it.
Mr. Mersfelder, I know we've kept you, and we appreciate, the college appreciates it very much.
Well, I appreciate your interest, but I feel like I've imposed on you
Not
here
at
talking
all.
too much.
Not
You
at
kept spurring me on.
Well, that's what I'm supposed to do. I just want to dig in
Well, I think
and have you recall these things.
Yeah, well, I want to say this, that I think the city should be mighty proud of that school. I went out there last year and talked to the Circle K, which is the organization of college boys. It's sponsored by the Kiwanis Club, and I had a very nice visit with them, and I expect to go out other times and visit the schools. I admire Dr. Barrett a great deal, and of course I just think Dr. Benson is one of the great men of our country. And that school is growing and growing, and I think all of the business people and other citizens of this city, men and all women, appreciate the work that they're doing out there. And in years to come, it'll be one of the outstanding schools in the country. I got one other item I want to show you.
Surely.
If you pardon me a minute.
It's all right.
Oh, excuse me.
No, that's why we got the long cords on.
Last year, well, for some 30 years, I've been making an award out at the OCU for the students who were there 4 years and graduated with the highest honors. I did that back in New Mexico for the New Mexico Normal University, called the Highland University, now at Las Vegas, my alma mater. And when I came here, I wanted to do the same thing here. I tried to get my club to do it, and they were busy they had too many projects already on. So for 30 years I've been doing that, and I think it's has given a lot of encouragement to a lot of young people. And I mentioned my connection interest in the school, so last year they made me Doctor of Laws.
Isn't that right?
An honorary degree, and this is the citation that was given by Dr. Bishop Angie Smith at the time, and that is one of the most beautifully written things. They spread it on pretty thick.
Well,
but it's a gorgeous citation.
It certainly is, sir.
I'll give you that. That's copies of that. The girls here ran off, so I'll give you that.
I'm sure
copy to keep
I'd like to have that.
I'm very, very proud of that because of what it represents.
It certainly is nice. Oh, we certainly thank you.
And so, well, you are more than welcome for having so much patience to put up with me and my voice. I apologize. But
Might be such that sometime in the future, perhaps we can get together again if you can recall some other items that may be that you think would be of interest, and we feel that anything that has affected the people here or anything that they have done is of interest because it's part of the historic.
Well, that's been a rambling business here.
Well, that's the whole purpose, because if we got too formal about it, then it would sound too formal.
Yeah, I guess that's right, too.
Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you.